And today I am thrilled to present you Athena Williams. I typically don't do any introduction. I let the speaker talk a little bit about what they do. In this case, I've known Athena for quite some time, and I'm very proud of her own journey. And I'm grateful that she joined us tonight to share some of that journey with us. Very, very excited. And I'll give you Athena Williams. Athena, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. And I appreciate the opportunity to share the work that I've been doing over the past 20 years. And you'll learn a lot more about the work, about perspective, and also a little bit more about me as we get going. Okay, so I'm going to dive in. Let me do a screen share. All right. Okay, there we go. Can everybody see that? Yeah, yep. Thumbs up. Okay, good. Just checking. All right, so here's our plan. So we're going to talk a little bit about why people move towards and then away from change, right? And this was from our description. We're going to look at neuroscience and how it can support your work. We're also going to look at specifically at characteristics and strategies that can help you be able to lead people through change. Now, every day, all of you, I imagine, lead people through change, right? But this tonight is to give you another set of perspectives and tools so that you can potentially try some new things and also reinvent your own relationship to change. Okay, so whether you have, 1 year experience or 20 years experience, I think that for all of us, it's humbling to be able to try something new, get out of our own comfort zone, and be able to get a new perspective, right? Which is why I think you're all here anyways. Yeah. Okay, so here's what I would request is that we make this a work session, right? So I could do a presentation, and I can, and this could just be a presentation for you. But knowing all of you and hanging out with Agile practitioners quite a bit, I know that you like to get to work, you like to really unpack things and start to apply things, right? So I want to invite everybody to make this a work session, engage fully, consider your own work as we're going through, and take actions, right? I'm going to suggest different strategies and actions, and allow yourself to shift real time, right? So it's easy, and I do it too. I go to a presentation, there's some good stuff, I take some notes, and then 2 months later, I find the notes and I think, oh, there's some great stuff in there. Why didn't I take action? Or it's time to take action. So the invitation for everybody is to take that action and really look in real time how you can shift your own leadership in relationship to change. Okay, and just to speak at a very high level about my experience, part of my background has been in managing and leading large-scale, complex organizational change for many, many years across many industries, and really being able to help people consider from a strategic perspective what needs to happen, but also from a day-to-day tactical perspective, what needs to happen. And often those two aren't always connected, right? We have a perception about what we think the change should look like. Then there's the reality on the ground, right? And I'm sure everybody encounters that with Agile process, right? As much as you prepare people, as many emails as you send out, as many tools as you share, there's still this sense of, how am I going to engage, and is this going to get the result from your people, and then also obviously from yourself and senior leaders often. So here's the question. I didn't intend to study the brain. I started to study the brain because I was doing a lot of deep transformational leadership and change in organizations. And I started to notice like, there are ways where things are sticking, and then there are ways that are predictable breakdowns, right? Where I've done everything, we've applied our methodology, we've done what we need to do, and people are not changing at the rate that we'd like them to change. Does anybody have that? I can't see everybody's hands, but I see some smiles, right? Like we always want the change to go faster, right? Or is that just me, right? I think it's probably everybody. And the reality is our mind is actually quite fast. Our brain, meaning the organ of the brain, and our body, right? So I work in both the space of change, neuroscience, and neuro leadership, as well as neurobiology. So we can have the mind, our software can have the perception that change is very fast, but our brain and our body and our ability to change is actually quite dense and a bit slower. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so why consider the brain? In my mind, the brain determines your success, right? You can have an amazing process, you can have, all the tools, but the brain, whether we like it or not, always wins. Okay, and I'll talk about that as we get going. People will only change when the brain and the body are on board. So I don't just say the brain, because there's a whole system, our neurobiology, right, that needs to be involved. And a lot of people go, oh, that's too much work, just get on board. And if we don't consider this, right, it's at our peril, right? It's at our peril of our projects, our success, quite frankly. And I would suggest that the best methods and processes, which agile methods are amazing, right, are only as good as your ability to address the needs of the brain, right? And then the last piece is ideally your brain and what you know, and their brain and what they know together is what will create profound change. But it has to be conditioned and aligned, right? And I'll talk a lot about that. So here's your first agile action, right? You might have a notebook, an iPad, whatever you write on. And I want you to just reflect on your last project, right? So and if you're not yet a practitioner, maybe think about a project you've been a part of. So what were the 3 biggest challenges? Okay. And I can't see the chat when I'm presenting. So I won't know if you put it in the chat, but I would love to see at some point, right? What were those 3 biggest challenges? Okay. So you might jot down, you might think about them in your mind, right? I'm sure you all are aware of those, right? Through your debrief and so forth. So here's where we're going to start. I'm going to just take a minute. I'm an applied neuroscientist, so I'm not in a lab. I'm not a scientist in doing research. But for me, I geek out about the brain, and particularly 3 areas of the brain. I love the whole brain, but 3 particular areas are of interest to us. Boy, did I sound like a geek there, right? And does anybody know at MIT, there is a lab, there is a library of 50,000 brains that have been collected and that get studied. But that's another presentation and work session. Okay, so 3 areas, and you might be aware of these. There's the last decade, there's been quite a bit of brain research. The 3 that I want to point you to is number 10. So our higher mental function, which is in the front part of the brain, behind our forehead, which is the prefrontal cortex. That is associated with our higher order function. So decision-making, problem solving, innovating, being creative. It's also associated with building relationships and compassion and being able to have empathy. So our prefrontal cortex, critical, particularly in the work that all of you do, right? I mean, the whole brain is critical, but that particular part of the brain. Now, the other part to draw your attention to is number 7, which is inside of 7, right, is the amygdala, which is our oldest part of the brain. So you probably have heard about that. That is responsible for our survival. It's where fight, flight, freeze, right, gets triggered. And while it's interesting in this particular graphic, it's in the association area. So if we associate anything as a threat, some part of us is going to signal, right? The amygdala, our amygdala will signal way before we even pick it up cognitively, right? It's like 0.0003 of a second that it will pick it up, right? And that's a survival mechanism. So you walk into the room, you've got your presentation or you're on Zoom, you think you're polished, ready to go, and you say one word that triggers somebody, your key stakeholder, right? And they're off. They're going, oh no, is this the right person? Is this project going to work? Did I make the right choice? You know, and it's so subtle. And this isn't, I'm not suggesting that anybody should be walking on eggshells around people, but we have to appreciate the brain is very sophisticated and very perceptive, right? And that's its job. Now, there's a lot more we'll talk about with the amygdala. The last piece, which is a particular interest for me late, particularly with COVID and all the change we're facing as a world, is the somatosensory area, which is number 2. This is where the brain and our body and nervous system begin to, we'll say, interact and inform each other. So somata, our body perception, and there is something called embodied cognition. So just as much as your brain is picking up and has its own intelligence, your entire neurobiology has its intelligence as well, right? So we want to pay attention to all of this. Now, most of us are not trained on how to do that, right? We're trained to think hard and that will solve the problem. The challenge is we are social creatures. We are always picking up cues, right? We're always picking up. I mean, all of you did as soon as I came on, right? You're like, what she got, you know, what's going on here? What is she going to say? Is she going to be interesting, right? And that's good. That's your job, right? And you may have already, you know, started to notice, oh yeah, I'm either feeling more relaxed, maybe a little bit more on edge, a little more inspired, right? Just from the first few minutes of us sharing, right? And connecting virtually. And I have a friend doing research at UCLA about how even virtually we affect each other's immune system and each other's brain function. So don't think just because you're working virtually, we're not impacting each other. We can impact each other profoundly. And just as a side note, I'm actually in New Zealand. I'm a resident of New Zealand. So it's tomorrow. It's tomorrow morning, and I can tell you it's going to be a good day. So, okay, I can always use that joke. So the somatosensory area is an important piece as well. Okay, so let's dig in. So what does the brain tell us about change? It says, I prefer stability, right, over really having to change, right? It also says, I prefer clear choices over too many options, right? And I love optionality, right? I'm a fan of options, but we hit decision fatigue, right? The brain just says enough, right? And then we find ourselves coming home, getting ready to make a meal, and we can't decide what we want to eat because we've made so many decisions during the day. Does anybody else do that? Is that just me? Yeah. Okay. Right. And maybe it is only me, but I from what I hear, it's quite a few people. And it's also, I prefer to preserve myself rather than innovate. Now, at one level, innovation is something that we would aspire to, of course, right? But the brain itself is about preservation. It's about predictability, right? I know what's going on. Now, if you juxtapose that to Agile, right, some of that aligns, but I would suggest a lot of it doesn't, right? You're trying to shape things up. right? You're trying to create more options, right? You're trying to innovate. You're trying to go into the unknown, right? And help people work differently, right? So it's important where I call it, I'm going to use this in a different way, an outside voice versus our inside voice, right? So the outside says, I love this process, right? I think you guys are doing a great job, guys and women inclusive, are doing a great job helping my team, right? Inside voice says something very different, right? I don't know what this means for my job. It sounds good, but I feel like it's a lot of work. Now, that is nothing personal to you. It's not personal to Agile methodology. It's not personal to your project. But if you do not understand this as a leader, you will miss out in being as effective as you can be. Okay, so let me dig into this. So Agile strategy number 1 for you is to ask compelling questions and really listen, right? I am certain you all have these points in your projects where, yes, I have to ask, and yes, I need to do this. People can pick up very quickly if you're really, really listening, even virtually, right? Or if you're off somewhere, right? We just are so perceptive. And we need to respect that, especially as change leaders, right? And so you want to be aware there's this outside inside voice going on, right? And you have it. We all have it, right? I have it. You have it. Now, you need to review your processes, your communication, and you want to ensure that you've got places, right, where people's unexpressed concerns get captured, right, get cataloged, yeah? Because otherwise, those are what can sabotage a project or you, right? I've had times where I've had so I started in mergers and acquisitions in the tech space. Huge projects, very complex, often bringing teams together, leadership teams together that really disliked each other, right? One was the acquiring company. I see people smiling, right? One was the acquiring company. One was like the competitor, the second, third level competitor, second down, and they really don't like each other, but they have to come together and work together, right? And so our role in change leadership is how do we come to that and understand the unspoken, unexpressed issues, right? Without projecting our own, what we think might be going on, right? But really listening. And you want to make sure you have a presence, right? A leadership presence that's approachable, right? And that you can welcome fears and concerns and even dissent. And one of my mentors very early in my career said, embrace dissent. And most people are like, oh gosh, it's the last thing I need. I'm trying to do this virtually. I'm dealing with all these issues. Just behave, everybody, right? And get in line, right? And they will, but we have to be willing to appreciate the dissent, because I have converted people to being the biggest advocates, right? They were the biggest dissenters, right? Or they disagreed and they really just were going to pull the whole thing down. And I was able to really work with them and shift things so that they become the biggest advocate. So it's possible. It takes some work, right? And so the last thing is to really listen, right? Really, really listen. Yeah. And I know, again, we all feel we listen enough, but this is listening for what people are saying, but also what they're not saying, right? So here's the action. You might jot down in your notebook or iPad. Ask yourself, how do I personally build in time and space into my process to listen to dissent, right? And even encourage it. It actually takes courage. And I was just working with a team yesterday, and I said to them, so if this all, we say go pear-shaped is a British saying, and we say it here in New Zealand. And I would say, if this goes pear-shaped, right, what will have happened? And they looked at me a little like, we don't talk about that. And I said, we better talk about it, because if we don't, and people are thinking that, and pointing and worrying in that direction, the brain and our entire system will organize towards that rather than addressing the dissent and then building success. Okay, so really important. So that's our first strategy and action. The next one is to start considering the difference between what's important to the business and the project, right? All of those things and more, right? Versus what's important to the brain, right? So I'm going to go back on the other list. This is what's important, right? And one could suggest many other things, right? We want culture, we want innovation, we want, new thinking, right? But here's what's important to the brain. So safety, predictability, certainty, right? Connection, social connection, familiarity, and trust, right? So we see those two lists together. And so here's a typical meeting, right? She's presenting, this guy is going, how are we actually going to get this done? Right? And what's our time frame? And how does this fit with everything we've got going on? Is this really going to work? Right? And that's okay. Those are the right questions. We want people to be asking critical questions, right? We don't want to shut that down, right? This person over here, right, has the project plan, has the target, has everything, sketched out, shaped in a very polished plan, knows exactly where you need to go, right, as a team and as a company. This person over here is going, I see some of the pieces, I don't see how they all fit together, right? And then this person here is going, oh no, we're not doing this again. We've tried 4 years in a row and and I see smiles, right? We still haven't cracked this, right? Why are we going back around? Now, nobody obviously is saying any of this in the meeting, right? Everybody's taking notes, everybody's doing their thing, right? But we need to be appreciative that this is going on for people, right? And many of you may already be, right? And so what we want to do is we want to honor and fully support people. So in the brain, we want that thumbs up, right? And what that looks like is that we understand there's a bit of this conflict, right, between what the business and the agile goals require and what the brain actually wants, right? We understand that, and it's not a problem, right? But we build it into our planning, our thinking, and how we operate, right, as leaders. So we want to build in time to work on the higher order activities of the prefrontal cortex, as well as this, what I call the survival order, right, of the amygdala, right? So if we do not take into account the concerns, the questions, how things might go off the rails or fail, which are survival order questions that the amygdala is going to have, because the amygdala is responsible for our survival, right? The amygdala makes sure that we're safe and protected. And boy, I am glad my amygdala does its job, right? Right? Important. The challenge is in the amount of crisis and change we're facing in the world, most people are in amygdala high alert, or what's called amygdala hijack. Most of the time, we're like this, eyes wide open, stress, what's next? Where is this going to happen? Are we safe, right? We are in a heightened state, right? And so as leaders, not that we can change everything going on in the world, obviously, but we can change how we approach people, right? With an honoring and a level of support and care, right, that will make the difference. So we want to ask people questions as well as process questions. Okay, we don't want to step over, and quite frankly, people are more complex, I think. I mean, I love people, right, doing the work, but often the process, right, and really going like, okay, this is the process, is for me very interesting and often more controllable, right? People, a little random, right? But that's what keeps it interesting, right? After all these years of doing this, working with 100,000 leaders and people around the world, it's still never a boring day, right? When we can really go, oh yeah, like, wow, why did that person do that? Right? What the heck were they thinking? And then we can get innovative to address it, right? It doesn't stop us and it doesn't even frustrate us. We train our neurobiology to really lean into it and innovate, right? And so one of the things that you can do is help people map their own journey through change. Okay, and I'll talk a lot more about that. And make sure that people really feel informed, supported, involved, right? And I'm certain you all do that in different ways. And you might explore, based on some of the challenges that you face that we documented at the beginning, where might you have involved people a little bit more, right? So you might just look, and here's the action, right? Where are 3 ways, right, that you could ask more people questions during your process, right? And I know you have your, your standard methodology and process, and there will be places where, it is important to have a conversation with someone. It is important to have a different inquiry, right? To make sure that you've addressed some of those brain issues, right? Those concerns to the brain. Now, the next thing is, are you selling Agile? And I do say sell. Some people are like, oh, but are you selling it in the right way? Okay, so there are ways that you probably all sell it, whether you're in an organization or you're going in and doing projects with organizations, right? And these are many: collaboration, right? Better quality, more flexibility, opportunities for improvement, right? Better processes, right? So there are many things that you will focus on. The question, however, is, how does the brain need to be sold? Okay, so let's go into that. The brain needs to go, I understand the process fully, right? And the interesting thing sometimes is they can't understand it fully, but the brain has that proclivity or that preference, right? I need to understand the process. I am in control, right? So the person, the brain, right, feels I am in control, which often in a lot of change initiatives, they aren't, right? And they can't be. Yeah. So the next one is, I trust people, right? I trust the people around me. Now, oftentimes we assume a level of trust with people. And what I say to leaders is, you always need to build in the importance of cultivating that trust and growing it with people. Don't assume it, right? Just because, right, we have whatever training, whatever experience, whatever projects we've worked on, that still is not enough for people to trust us, right? So we'll talk about some ideas of like how you speak into what the brain needs, right? And I see and I believe the benefits, not just, the list of benefits that we talked about. And someone has taken the time to make sure I feel clear and good about the process, right? They haven't just rolled out, the deck, right? And we've all done that, and we may still all do that. But the question is what else do you put around that to make sure that the brain is also sold, right? And so what you need to do is build your change leadership, right? You want to share ownership where you can, and usually beyond what you would normally do. We go in, and I remember for me, early days, like I had my, my spiel, right? This is my thing. This is my process. This is how I work. And that's what they're paying for, right? Whether you're internal or you're coming in from the outside, right? That is what they're paying for. But don't underestimate the importance of cultivating and growing ownership, right? For sponsorship reasons, obviously, but also when you get ready to ask people to change, right? And there's a great quote by a man called Peter Senge, which many of you are probably familiar with. And he says, people don't mind changing, but they don't want to be changed. Very different. So are we going in, changing people, or are we inviting people, right, to own, participate, involve, right, beyond what you typically do? So you may have your ways of prescriptive ways of involving them, but you might go, am I truly involving them, and do I have the ownership, right? And so how can you take time to personally gain the buy-in and the stakeholder conversations and the trust building that's needed? And that requires you to have a new level of change leadership, right? And how do you resist the urge to put the process before the people, right? And again, not that the process, there's anything wrong with the process, right? But it's, we have to catch ourselves. Where is our comfort zone, right? And do we just go in, here we go, let's make this happen? And the people stuff is a little bit harder, right? And not in a bad way, right? People, once you've got them on board and you invest the time and energy and you build the trust and loyalty, it's completely worth it, right? Completely worth it. And a couple years ago, we did a program bringing together 2 large banks, Australia, New Zealand, Asia. And the 2 banks had been competitors for 130 years. And literally the culture, right, was completely different. Literally, one had blue, as in, everything that blue symbolized for them, and the other had a green culture, in that they had a whole set of ways of being that were, quote, green for them. And they were what we call poles apart, meaning very different. And we had to do a lot of work looking at, how do we bring them together? How do we have these conversations? And many of you may already do that, but there were several times in the process where I had to go, I just want to run them through the process, right? If I admit it, right, publicly, right? We all do. And we're like, okay, this is a good process. If they would just trust me and just let me do my thing. Here's the deal. I've been in front of executive teams where unless I take the time to build, they won't let me go through the process, right? And I don't know if anybody else has experienced that, but it's important to appreciate we have to do the stakeholder management around our process. And the stakeholders are the people involved, as well as management, as well as customers. 360 all the way around, right? And so we have to do the hard work of coaching and guiding people through the process so that they can be wildly successful. Right? We want our people and we want to be successful, but when we focus on them being successful, we are, right? So what I would suggest is that you develop your own change leadership to the next level. And here's an action for you, right? What, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your change leadership capacity, right? Maybe you see yourself as a strong change leader already. Right? Maybe you'd give yourself under a 5, and that's okay. But then take some time to determine how you can strengthen it, right? And what you can do so that you're really leading the change versus simply implementing a process, okay? And you need to do both. And that's no, no disrespect for process at all. But we have to do both to be most effective, right? And to really create what we all know is possible, right? The innovation, the new ways of working, the collaboration, right? Which I think lights all of us up. It's certain that's why I do what I do, right? To see people learn and grow and change and organizations change, right? It's very exciting. So here's another layer for you is, do your clients or customers see change positively? Most of us, I would imagine, in this room, this virtual room, see change positively, right? That's why you probably all do what you do, right? I just saw a cat tail on somebody's video. I love it, we I see a cat head. Oh, wonderful. And, we want to be really clear, right? How are we seeing change, right? So like you, I believe that change is positive, right? Now, your clients may not feel the same way, even if they say they do, right? Our brain is wired to resist change, right? So our work is to make change safe for people. Now, not in the at the expense of innovation, right? But making it safe enough for people to really play, right? And play full out. So when we understand the power, right? You all understand the power and the potential of Agile, right? But do they have a mental model that's positive, right? Is that something that they have? And if not, what do you need to do to help them? So here's what we need to do. The reality is most people do not see change as positive, right? They often the opposite. Now, when you initiate, you would think, and studies show that if you initiate change, you think it's more positive. But here's the deal, even if you initiate, I see people shaking their head, even if you initiate the change, you may not necessarily see it as positive, which is fascinating to me because you've put your hand up, you've said, I'm willing to change. And some part of you is going, maybe not right now, right? I mean, I've for decades tried to get my 8 fruits and vegetables every day, right? And we all know, right? 8 fruits and vegetables. Well, now it's 8. Most people know 5. Now it's 8. And I've gotten creative. I put them in smoothies. I put them in soups. I put them in every dish, right? I have them for breakfast, right? And I still do not get my 8 fruits and vegetables, right? Even though I know it's positive, I know it's a good change to make. It will make my whole body health better, right? And we call this, which many of you are familiar with, the knowing doing gap. Right? We know what we need to do, our people and our projects, right? We know, and then the gap is over here, right? Between what we know and what we're doing, right? And that's true. We can't assume the perception of change is positive, right? And so here's what we need to do, right? We need, all right, let me just see here. There we go. So this is what we might hear, right? So I have to go along with this Agile thing. Right? But frankly, I don't know if it's going to work, right? I don't know if it's going to bring the results. Now that is potentially what they would even say to you. They probably wouldn't even say that. But here's what's underneath. I want to be supportive of the team, right? But I'm scared it won't work or I could fail, right? Every one of us has that concern. And I don't care how many years you've been doing it, how polished you are, we have an instinctual human drive to survive and to succeed, right? That keeps us alive every day, right? So we have to, here's another one, right? I know, right? They're trying to make it better. Right? My manager's trying to do things, right? They feel like it's going to create, success for us. But here's what I feel. It's actually creating more chaos than progress, right? And so what they're thinking often at a deeper level is, I don't know if I can handle the stress that comes with constant change. Now, we all think the change is invigorating and good, and it's good to have sprints, and it's good to keep people on their toes, and it's good, and it is. But for them, we have to appreciate not everybody has a positive mindset or mental model, right, of change the same way we do, right? They may be good technically, they may be good doing what they do, but they're like, this is a lot. You're asking me to do all of this on top of, right, what I'm already doing. And even though that's going to transform what they're doing and make it better, usually, right, we still have to appreciate that's going on for people, right, in their brain and in their entire neurobiology. So they show up late to a meeting. You start to notice disengagement, right? You start to also, sometimes people that are leading this get disengaged because we get disenchanted, right? Like, gosh, if they would have just adopted what I said, or I've gone through this 6 times with them, what part of this do they not understand, right? This is simple, right? And, you know, we have to appreciate that these things are going on, right? And so when we think about the mental model, right, the brain needs a mental model that's proven, charted, familiar, positive, right? Rewards based, right? So I'm going to get a reward. Right now, it may not be, you know, hey, you get, it might be, right? You build in rewards that are very visible, but it can also be less visible rewards. Like, hey, I know you stayed up late to attend this meeting. I just want to let you know it made a big difference. Thank you. Right? And really appreciating and rewarding, right, the behavior that you want to see, right? And the brain also needs little or no risk, for better or worse, right? That is how we are wired. And the brain needs to know that success is inevitable. So as you can see, there's a bit of a mismatch, right? And so what we need to do is be aware of the mental models, right? Be aware from what you hear from clients, right? What you hear from organization, from customers, right? All the way 360, like, what are the mental models? Now, most people are going to say we support change and innovation, but when you listen to their language and to what they're really thinking, and to some of the gossip and the right, that goes on, and the frustration, right? Because it does, of course, right? It would in every project. That's where you're going to start to really get exposure to the true mental models that people have. Now, you can't make people have a particular mental model, but you can be aware and start to shift and guide it, right? And so you want to appreciate that they need different things from the process than you do, right? You might be like, woo, here we go, right? We got the roadmap, we got the process, right? That's awesome. Don't get me wrong. And I respect, right, what everybody does every day. However, is that everything that your people need that are impacted or that will be involved, right? And so what we want to do is we want to identify ways to provide a positive mental model. So that could be as simple as making, talking directly about the benefits of this change, right? Which many of you may already do, but then really checking in with people and seeing, do they see the benefit? What's the benefit to them, right? And how will this truly help them, right? So we want to make sure that we're linking it up for people. Otherwise, their first response will be, yes, I agree. And then at the same time, the body's going, and the neurobiology is going, whoa, wait a minute, right? And I think you're always going to get a little bit of that. Don't get me wrong, but we want to be mindful of minimizing this up front, right? The pushback. And the pushback, we're very sophisticated as adults, right? Usually. And the pushback will be very sophisticated. It'll be, I've installed that and I've tried 4 times and it just doesn't seem to be giving me the report I need. Right? And perhaps, but if the brain is wired towards change is hard, change is negative, this is going to cost me my job potentially, right? Or I now have to report to this person. It's interesting what happens. Now, I'm not saying that people are lying, of course not. But what can happen is that person, if they just took another pass at running the report differently and believe that, there can be another way, right? Or they can get somebody else involved, maybe they would have a different solution, okay? So the last thing is, I would say, do not assume everyone is truly on board with the change, right? Assess and course correct at each step. And that's the nature, I would suggest, right, of Agile, right? Always course correcting. But you might find that you're making your own assumptions that you have to challenge. So here is the action for you. How specifically do you reinforce a positive mental model, right? And what tools in communication can you use? So it could be a really great case study. It could be an article. It could be a testimonial from people that are early stage in the change, right? I've used videos, right? Have people like, you know, become our change advocates, right? It could be a piece of research, but don't think, right, that you don't have to keep selling and keep convincing, right? Because we think, whoo, it's been approved, we've got budget, let's make this happen, right? And I say to people, ABS, right? Always be selling, right? And people are like, I'm not a salesperson. You are not. However, in this case, you do need to be selling, right? And you need to be aware of those mental models. So the last piece is, one last piece I want to introduce is like, are you anticipatory enough? So what I mean by that is, and this is a question for yourself, is do I know what the top 3 concerns are before they do, right? Have I anticipated enough, right? Am I truly open to the feedback, right? About where things can break down, which I mentioned earlier, right? And then where and how am I being willing, right, to share and be able to go back, right? And so we have to be clear, like, are we being anticipatory enough? And what I mean by that is you need to anticipate tactically, but also strategically. Okay, so what I mean by that is that there's a value, immense value, I feel, in Agile that is what we would call generative, right? That you're generating from things that never have existed because of the powerful processes, right? So you're generating, and that's where true innovation occurs, right? You've got this playing field, and you've got people showing up differently, and you have people having different conversations, and you have the opportunity to generate anew, right? Now, the challenge with that is that you need to be both tactical and strategic, right? At the same time. Now, most people's brains can operate in one or the other, but it's hard sometimes to go between the two, right? And I'll talk about that in a moment. True leadership requires that level, and it's a new level of anticipation, right? That is both at the 5,000 foot or even 1,000 foot view, as well as the 30,000 foot view. So some years ago, we did work with Intel, and I love this phrase they use is macroscope, microscope, right? We need to be willing to go way in and way out, right? Microscope in, macroscope out, right? And a lot of people's brains are not wired that way. It's a skill, and it's a conditioning of the brain and the neurobiology that's comfortable either going big picture and then down to tactical, right? And all of you and your brains have preferences. Now, you might go a little bit up, but do you go way up? Can you go 20 years out in your industry, right? Can you go 2 years out in your project, right? So we want to begin to explore that. And it's critical to be strategic, particularly in the unknown we're facing right now in our world, right? And so what I would ask you is, what are your anticipatory methods, right? How are you getting ahead and being able to anticipate, right? And really look and see in the future. And then how do you increase the way you anticipate so that other people's brains, right, can stay online, and you avoid what I would call this amygdala hijack, right? Which you can Google, and there's a lot written about it. So if we can anticipate and help other people anticipate, right, then we avoid this, not completely, but we minimize that, deer in the headlights, right? And in New Zealand, it's so funny. So I'm originally Canadian, and then lived in the US, and then have lived overseas. And in New Zealand, they say possum in the headlights. And I'm always like, possums are too short, right? Like they don't even see, you would already have hit it before they see the headlights, or you see them in the headlights. So I kind of have an issue with that saying, but they don't say deer in the headlights here. They say possum in the headlights, which is kind of funny. And if there's any Kiwis on the call, please explain to me, because I always ask people, but I digress. Just wanted to put a comedic moment in there for you. And some people are like figuring it out now. They're like, well, wait a minute. If they were this far away, right? Statistically, we could see them before we hit them, right? Okay, so we want to stay out of the amygdala hijack. And we want to create a new level of presence, right? Where we're able to notice more. So whatever practices, so we have a whole set of neurobiological practices that we teach people so that their perception is keen, right? Is really honed in, and they can anticipate. So your strategy then is to anticipate much, much more. And so you want to go beyond what you typically anticipate. You want to challenge yourself, right? To anticipate at tactical as well as strategic. And you want to train yourself and your team to anticipate more even while you're generating. Now, how do you anticipate, right? Where that could go. And it's hard sometimes to get people to really, nudge them beyond, right? And the last thing is you want to be careful that you're not too open-ended and let's wait and see, because that will have its own challenges. Right? So we want to be open enough so that people can iterate, generate, innovate, right? But we don't want to be so open that people are going, what are we doing this for, right? And how does this fit, right? And so the last thing is the invitation for all of you to build your leadership presence so that you can pick up on the subtleties. Right? So somebody says something, does something, and you don't miss it, because you will pay later if you miss it, right? We've got to become very keen, very present, right? And really condition our entire neurobiology to pick that up. Yeah. Okay. And so the action is to go like, where can I anticipate, right, in my process without jumping the gun? Right? I'm not getting too far ahead, but I'm anticipatory, right? And so just as we start to wrap up, I'm aware of time. So I know I'm just at my 45 minutes. So I'm going to wrap up and open it for questions. Here's a quick summary for you. So first, ask compelling questions and listen fully, right? Second, honor and fully support your people. Right? And the people involved, right? Your own teams, the people around you, right? Third, build your change leadership. Fourth, be aware of the mental models, because even if you are in change and you're a change advocate and a change instigator, if I dare say, you have your own challenges with change, right? I do, we all do. So be mindful of your own mental model and how it shows up, as you're working with people, because it does, right? And the last, I just as a side note on that one, I recently had a client I was working with one-on-one, responsible for a very large initiative. And he said to me, oh, I am really supportive of the change. I'm an advocate, I'm positive. And I said to him, can you listen to the last recording, right, of the meeting, because they do record their meetings. And he was actually shocked. He thought he was being positive. And when he heard himself present certain things and communicate with people, it was like this, kind of at a distance. He didn't want people he wanted people to behave and do what he recommended. But when they started, there was any sense of pushback, his negative mental model actually came through, which happens under stress, right? So the last one is anticipate change much, much more. right? Back to our anticipatory requirements. Okay, and so the last three things, which I've embedded, but I do want to call out, is you want to build your change leadership, right? So do I truly understand the process of human change and development beyond the change curve, right? I could do a whole talk about the change curve, how it works, how it actually doesn't, and disserves people in change. Right? Maybe you'll invite me back next year. But that's, that's a whole conversation. And the second is strategic leadership. Am I being strategic enough and anticipatory enough? Right? And the third is your leadership presence. Do I have an embodied sense of leadership that's really going to help my nervous system, is going to help other people's nervous system change and adapt, right? So those are the three characteristics or skills really that you want to be building. So the last thing I would say, your last Agile action for today, is take time to action some of the insights that you got from today, right? My deepest intention anytime I speak, present, share, is that even if there was just one thing that I shared that you thought, I have to look at my process or look at how I'm operating, take the time to do that. Book time in tomorrow, right? Or next week. But just really the invitation for all of you is to shift from being an Agile practitioner to being an Agile leader, right? And many of you might already identify that way. But if you don't, really consider, how do I take that journey? Okay. And the last thing I'd say, just as a way to wrap up, we've helped many, many people become Agile leaders. And the invitation for all of you is, if we can help you, please feel free to reach out. We have a white paper that I'd be happy to share. So just email team@upleveldna.com. Also, if you want to have a chat, email us and we'll get that set up. And if you have an event and you'd like to have some form of this presentation to a team that you're working on, and we can actually go a bit deeper on the specific strategies, right, for your team, customize them, I'd be happy to do that. And really make sure at the end of the day that people can change, they can innovate, and they can make the difference that I think we probably can all see is possible. So now, by understanding and respecting how the brain operates, my hope is that that really serves all of you. Okay, so feel free to reach out to get the white paper, and also with any questions or if you'd like to chat. All right, so I'm going to turn it over. So this is your brain now that we've done all of this and had this conversation, right? It's like clear, open, hopefully in a creative zone. I know it's evening for you. So I'm going to open to questions, and whoever's facilitating questions, I'm happy to answer. And do you want me to stop sharing? Shall I stop sharing? You want me to? Hold on one second. Okay, there we go. So I can see more people. Okay, question, comment.
First of all, thank you, Athena. Many folks in the audience may have not realized that currently you are in New Zealand. It's around 1 p.m. on Friday. Yep. So I really, really appreciate, again, I wanna tell you that really appreciate you joining us tonight and for a wonderful presentation.
You bet. And I spent many years on the East Coast, went to school in Boston. And so I'm so happy also to support my East Coasters in any way I can from over here, because I miss it. And at some point I will be back. But for right now, I'm here for a little bit longer, but working virtually, which is, as we know now, is actually quite easy to do. So questions, what can I answer and how can I help? Do you want to look? Let me look in chat. Here we go.
Athena, could you please share the slide where you shared the email where you can be reached?
Oh, sure, of course. Yep. Let me see here, share. There you go.
I know it's team up level at DNA, but one of you two.
Team at upleveldna.com. And then the white paper gets into a lot more, right, in terms of the research and everything. But I tried to really pull out, the pieces I thought would serve best for beginning the conversation. But the white paper, we're happy to send that to you and support your work. Yep. All right. What else? What are other questions that people have?
I've got a specific situation that I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
Relevant. So in the large organization and our enterprise Agile tools team is in the course of a year are rolling out 6 major new tools and a new scaling framework. And the organization is expressing significant change fatigue. And the tools group definition of success is tool adoption, whether people get any value out of it or not. So 2 sides to my question, and I don't know if either of these are possible. One, how do we convince the tools group to understand a different way of rolling out this massive amount of change? And for the people that we coach, how do we help them be successful with this onslaught of tools and processes?
Yeah. So there's many that we could be here a few hours, but at a high level, I think that I would invite them. Tool adoption is a fine goal to have, but it's adoption plus success, right? It's adoption plus application, right? Plus results and success. So what I would often have a conversation around is, this is like the price of admission is the adoption, right? In my mind, right? And no district, like that's the price of admission. That's the base, that's like the base level. But once they adopt, what else is going to be possible, right? And where else can they go? And so when I think often people will look at the tools, and absolutely that needs to happen, but we have to begin to vision a bigger picture for them to be able to bring them along what else is possible. So I think the coaching can be fantastic where we've got this adoption, and let's also look at this longer horizon. So that's kind of one piece of your question, right? And that's stakeholder management, sharing a strategic view, being able to persuade, influence, stretch people's perception about what's possible. Because one tool adopted can do amazing things, right? But they also need to see beyond just the adoption. So that's one piece. The second piece, which you said in terms of coaching and helping people, is when people feel like everybody's familiar with WIFM, right? What's in it for me, right? And when people have connected, I'm adopting this tool and it's helping me for this reason, right? We can make that. So some great things to do is you could do a really fun video about how somebody is using a new tool, right? You could do, a set of case studies about somebody's implemented the tool and look what has occurred. So that's where we're like, look, we're just trying to get them to use the tool, but we have to go probably 6 or 10 steps beyond that. So I think what I've seen is when people go, oh, adopting this tool is good for me, I'm not just ticking the box because that's what my manager said, right? They truly believe it. And that means we do have to sell the tools a little more, right? Than just the tech stacks, this is what it's going to do, but the human side of the tool. So there's a lot more I could say, and definitely reach out, happy to chat. But I think those are 2 pieces that I would look. And then the last piece, which is for everybody, and a question for you is, and maybe you can respond quick and I'll respond back, is where do you think people are resisting most? Like, where is the resistance coming from? Is it the number of tools? Is it, because it sounds like there's change fatigue, right? Which would happen. So is it the number of tools? Is it the timeline? Is it like, what's the pushback and what's creating the fatigue?
Well, I think the fatigue is the number and the,
Okay.
the constant change. I think one of the root causes of the pushback is not understanding the value that they're going to get out of it, because they have to put in a lot of work so that somebody else gets value, so that the CEO can see this or that.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily see the value
Yes.
that they'll get out of it.
Yes, and I think, thank you for that, because that was my intuition, but I wanted to check, is that they're seeing downstream, or no, they're seeing upstream, sorry. They're seeing like, I have to implement this damn tool, but we have to help them see downstream of the benefit and what's the new world look like when that tool is fully adopted. Because a tool in and of itself is okay, but the change it creates is what's sexy, I think. Right? It's like, here's this tool, here's what happens, here's the change that's going to occur, here's how it's going to make everybody better, right? Not just the CEO, but sometimes that journey between, the tool adoption and how it's really going to help, we don't take the time to link that up for people, right? We assume it. Right? We say, well, of course they're going to know why this tool is going to help them. But we have to often do a better job linking it up for people. And it's not saying you've missed anything, but when there's change fatigue, we have to go back into selling a little bit more and nurturing the people a bit more, right? So that's probably enough. Hopefully that was helpful as a start, and then happy to have a chat. Was that useful, or?
Yes, thank you.
As a beginning.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, I think if I might contribute, Athena, I think that you touched upon a key word, the assumption when David postulated the question. There are like 6 tools, what I understood, and obviously there's a huge undertaking. And then connecting the what's in it for me, right? So you should, especially when we talk about tools, features, there has to be some desired outcome, and you test that assumption. If it hasn't been tested, like, what is in it for me? What is it for the user? It's highly unlikely that it succeed.
Yeah, that's it. And I see in the chat, somebody asked, like, how do we turn that light bulb on? And I'll give you an example. So I worked with a manufacturing and equipment calibration company, and they made parts that went into CAT scan machines, right? And so everybody on the floor had a perception of, we've got to implement this new process. And they were like, well, we've just got to do it because we were told by the boss, right, to do it. And there, unfortunately, disengagement was high, frustration was high, there was a lot of infighting. And what we did is we said, okay, what do we need to do to help people see downstream, right? Like what they're actually doing, right? It's this, they're calibrating this equipment. And one of the things that we did that I'll never forget, that was amazing, and it was simple, but it actually was very impactful, is we got stories of the people who were using the CAT scan machines at Kaiser, right? This was in San Francisco, at Kaiser, and from the doctors, the nurses, and the patients. And when they saw the stories of the fact, I'm calibrating this equipment, which is kind of unsexy, right? I think it's very sexy in some ways, right? We're calibrating over here, but what's actually happening? There was this moment where people lit up because they realized somebody goes through the CAT scan, it detects something that was unknown, it saves somebody's life. So I'm not just calibrating a piece of equipment, I'm saving somebody's life now. Wow. Because all of us want to feel what we're doing is significant and we all matter. And so when you can create the why and also like how they matter, you know, it's not foolproof, right? This isn't a like manipulative technique. It's a really to go, my difference matters. When I have higher quality and they have less days that the CAT scan machine is turned, you know, is not functional, I see how I fit into the universe, right? And we all want to feel that. We want to feel we matter, particularly during times like COVID, where we feel helpless, right? Often. So don't underestimate really getting at that deeper human desire to feel we matter, and not in a like kumbaya way. I mean, you can do that, but it's more just really helping people see their significance, right? And then you can do kumbaya too. Okay. All right. Because I love that as well. Okay. What else? Maybe one or two more questions? Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Quick time check, say 10. We have time for maybe one more question.
Okay, great.
Oh boy, a lot of pressure.
Come on, ask something good. I'm sure.
So what do you do, or what would you suggest if you know, you keep coming up against someone's defenses, you know, their automatic, you know, responses. So if you notice that they're not being positive and you try to point that out to them and they become very territorial, or, you know, and I know that ties into change, but where you're looked at as being, you know, a threat and or doesn't feel like it's coming from a rational place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, many thoughts. So one is sometimes we come in as the experts and we don't realize it, but we're coming in and saying, here it is, right? And we're kind of imposing, right? Not that we would intend that. So, but I say to people, so what I say to people is come alongside them. Because as soon as you're coming at them with a process that you need them to implement, they're going to push back. That's human nature. So part of what we need to do is we need to come alongside them, have a conversation with them, include them where they can, you know, where it's appropriate. Sometimes it's not, right, in certain places. But we want to disarm the resistance. Right? And the way that we do that with the brain is we help people feel safe. And the way we help people feel safe is we are inclusive. We include them, right? So it's not us, them, right? And we do a lot of work around this with organizations of like, unknowingly, they've created an us, them culture, right? So, oh, it's the agile people. Right, or oh, it's the change people, right? And we have to find a way to not undo it, but to change that. So we come alongside. So practically, what this looks like is it might be briefing someone before a meeting to reduce resistance, right? It might be asking what their concerns and questions are. It might be stepping into their world. Right, saying, hey, you know, we're looking at doing this. Can I spend a little bit of time, you know, understanding this, right? So we come alongside, literally on the same side of the table, right, as them. And that will reduce some of the resistance. Now, people are going to naturally have fear and resistance. So the other thing is not to be bothered by it. Right? Just do some of the things that you know I mentioned so far, right? And there's some more things in the white paper as well. But what we want to do is appreciate that their resistance is natural, and we don't want to plow over them, but we want to keep including them. So it's a more inclusive model. So the last thing I would say is there can be times where you involve them in workshops that some part of you goes, I don't want that person in the room. That's the one to include, and get them and let them be a bit cranky pants, but let them also be with people that can see the possibility of the change, right? And they may still at the end of the day dig their heels in and resist, right? But at the end of the day, if they are an obstruction and I've had to do this as well, is I will say, so I appreciate this isn't what you had planned. And we do have, we have this initiative that we need to, we need to move forward. So what can I do so that you can participate in a way that's going to get the results? So I'm quite a little bit pointed, actually. Now, it's not in a confrontational way, but it's like coming alongside and saying, we got to do this. I get it's not what maybe either of us voted for, right? But this is what we've got. We don't make anybody the bad person, right? We're not dinging, CEO, board, whatever, right? But we are going like, we're in this together. So let's figure out how to make the most of, right? And so forth. So Scott, what of that can you take and put into action? There you are, you went away, so I'm calling you back. There you are. So what would you put into action? I'm also a coach, so you get in trouble sometimes. Go ahead. What you got?
That's a good question. I am not working in an agile space currently, so I guess I can apply that whenever I interact with people that I notice their defenses coming up. Try to see from their perspective, and also, and try to get others involved if I feel like someone is acting irrationally.
Yeah.
Be able to get perspective.
Yeah, and we just say yes to the resistance, right? We honor it. And we go, of course, this person, their brain, their neurobiology is trying to protect them, right? And we also, when we respect the resistance and not try to push against it, something neurobiologically happens. And that's where leadership presence becomes really important, because we create what we call a big enough container to handle anything, any resistance, any drama, any bullshit, right, that comes along. We have a presence that can really stay the course, but that takes something. We have to build that capacity in our own nervous system, right? And it's not simply mindset or mind shift. It's literally the capacity to deal. And I didn't say at the beginning, but just one last piece that's important to note is that the things that I'm sharing, I have for the past 10 years been working with businesses and governments after natural disasters. So I'm often brought in when stuff is broken apart and shit's happened, right? And basically have to work with the leaders in business, in government, to be able to navigate like unheard of situations. Right? Those could be natural disasters, could be shootings, could be hostage situations, like very serious stuff. So the stuff that I'm saying is not simply, it's not simply a theory, right? This is stuff that day to day I need to apply so that people can really get on board and make the change, because sometimes that means people's lives. And not everybody's working in that way or in that space, but I've got mission critical things sometimes that I'm being asked to work on, right? So the reason I share that is that everything I shared, I think my hope is that it serves everybody well in whatever way you create change and goodness in the world. So thank you.